So we welcome you to the show. And Susan, I caught the last tail end of it, and it sounded like you got some settling there with Dr. Tim.
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
It's your fault, you and Michael. I mean, it's Tim's fault, too. But the suggestions, embarrassment / ashamed. Yeah, the worksheets, I did 4 this morning while I was lying on a gurney in the hospital waiting to have a hernia repaired, and it's all repaired, and I'm home, and it went well.
Wow.
And yeah, I'm a multitasker.
You are.
So,
That's
Jeanie,
awesome.
I've been thinking, yeah, it's been needing to be done. I look as if I have male accoutrements on one side of my lowers, and I'm yeah.
Well, that was a quick procedure.
It was about an hour and a half. I was in there by 5 this morning. I love it when they call you in early for things like that.
Right.
So, anyway, Jeanie, I've been wondering, you've probably done this, but have you gone on the internet to find equivalents to what BlogTalk does, including archiving? There must be many of those, or some at least.
Yeah, I have done some Google searches, and I haven't come up with anything positive yet. I actually sent an email to the young man one of the young men who is doing the converting, and asked him if he had any idea. And he wrote me back a huge email with a bunch of suggestions, and he said, but I'll look into it and I'll let you know. And so, like Dr. Tim said, letting somebody else handle it. And so that's what I, have done today, and just let it go.
So I have another question about the archive. When I listen to an archive, it asks me if I want to just listen or download. If you could instruct people to download and put a name on it, isn't it theirs?
It is. It saves it to your computer.
Yeah.
It'll usually put it in your downloads with some really weird, bunch of numbers and letters and things like that, and you can just click on it and rename it and name it whatever show it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I bet your listeners would be happy to do that.
Right. And what they're, excuse me, right now, see all of the BlogTalk, so like if you download or listen, you're actually listening to the show on BlogTalk's site. And so I've listened to them. I haven't heard back yet, as far as, what happens to our archives. Will they still be there, or, are they gone too? They haven't answered me yet.
Wow, good question. They must have thought about that, because it's just jammed with archives.
Yeah, we've got 14 years. Well, when they quit on January 31st, we started January 31st of 2011. So when they quit January 31st of 2025, it will be exactly 15 years.
Wow.
So, 14 years, excuse me. Yeah.
That's all right. I don't do math. You could have fooled me.
Yeah, we would have been going into our 15th year with them. I had attempted to be, what would you call it, productive ahead of time, knowing that the end of December and the 1st of January was going to be preoccupied. And I had gone ahead and created shows on BlogTalk through the end of February, and had created on our website through February, but all of the links will refer to BlogTalk. So I'll have to, that's the only thing, is all of our links on our website, if they don't keep the archives, will have to be redirected somewhere else, or people will click on it and there'll be nothing there.
Jeanie.
We have, which means going into the website and changing every link for the last 14 years. But we do have them preserved on Susan, that runs our domain. She has downloaded all of them to an external hard drive, but then she's in the process now of uploading them to Dropbox. But people can't access Dropbox because, it requires a password and a second authorization and all this other for every click. So they'll have to be stored somewhere else. And if they're stored on our domain, which we could do, but that would make our bandwidth, and I don't understand how all of it works, but I know that our cost would probably
you'd have to
triple.
rent more. Yeah, of course.
So, yeah. So,
I can see why you're having to do deep breathing. This is a lot.
Yeah, and it's, like Dr. Tim, he actually sent me a really sweet email last night, too. And, if the worst case scenario, I mean, we've got all of them saved, so that's not a problem. But the worst case scenario is there may be a time until we figure out where we're going to store them that people won't be able to access the downloads.
Mm-hmm. But you've got the YouTube stuff. I mean, there's a lot of juicy stuff in the meantime.
I thought of that, too. I don't know, even with their paid subscription, if they'll allow us, because what we've got out there now, the guys have been converting just our hour to MP4s and summarizing them and everything. And so what's on our YouTube channel is just ours. So, I would have to upload all of the entire show to get Dr. Tim's on there, too. And I want his hour to be available for people, too. So, either way,
and
it's
unfortunately,
going to be some work.
Yeah, unfortunately, when they close down, the biggest cost in BlogTalk, I would suspect, is not the technology that allows us to do this, but rather the storage. Storage is costly, and then bandwidth means, if one person's listening, you just need a little tiny bandwidth. But if it's going to be available to 10,000 people and 200, 500, 1,000, then that exponentially raises the price. And ultimately, as opposed to saying, well, if you'd like this show, download it so then it'll be yours, our objective is to, at some point, have this available in a self-funding way that it's going to be available on the internet for eternity, so that it's available to anybody, anytime, past, present, future.
So,
Leaving
Michael,
or dead, including ourselves.
Are you saying that if one or two people listen, it's okay, but 1,000 people aren't going to be on at once? Maybe they will. Maybe that's what you're thinking of. But if it's two people, that's okay, right? Or are they taking into account?
There are two factors. There are two factors. There are how many who are doing it once, and how many do it over a period of time. Everything that they output costs money, that they store and then output. So, bandwidth has to increase if you've got 1,000 people listening at once, or 1,000 people listening or downloading at different times. It's still bandwidth, and that's the truth.
I see.
So,
oh boy.
And then there's the giant task of shifting it all over. That's like mega. And so when the resources are to do it, we'll take it to the next level. And in the meantime, there may be a temporary period. Hopefully, it'll be a short temporary period that the archives will only be available through the ones who convert it to video on
and
YouTube.
The conversion task. Are you doing the special shows? I mean, the tagged shows, whatever you call them.
They are all on. They are all on YouTube under special shows. So if you go to our YouTube channel and click playlist, there is a playlist called special shows, and they are all there.
Whoa!
And thank you to our two volunteers for all the work they've done to get those converted to MP4s. So that they can be on YouTube.
Well, that must be a relief.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a process.
How many are on there?
That's just a way.
How many?
Probably more than 1,000 now.
Of your special shows?
Well, the special shows and regular shows both. There's one of the volunteers that worked on the special show. The one person was volunteering to work on the special shows and then working backward, and the other person started in day one and working forward, so they meet in the middle when 6,000 shows are converted. So anyway, it's just another thing in what it takes to make it available to every mind, heart, and being on the planet, and that's what we're going to do.
You're sure doing it.
And I did get an email. I just now opened it from Andre. he's one of the fellows that's doing the conversions, and I had sent him the BlogTalk email that I had gotten, and he said, perhaps explore doing the Spreaker option that BlogTalk suggests as an easy redirect. Spreaker is not one that we can do a live show on, but it sounds like their sister companies both are owned by iHeartRadio. And so I wrote to BlogTalk and asked them, you know, if that would move all of our archives over to Spreaker. And if that's the case, you know, then all of our past shows anyway would be on Spreaker. And
unless it's fee-based, and that there's one part of it at least that means if you listen, you have to pay them. And so we're probably not going to do that option if that's what it takes.
Yeah, and I've written to them and asked them about that because we don't want to charge the listeners. I mean, yeah, that would be a way of monetizing, but, you know, that's not in our plan to do. But if that would move all the archives over and not cost our listeners a fee, that would be an easy way to get everything redirected. And then after, you know, the first of the year when things settle down with Brian, then can take a deeper dive into alternatives. So that was what he suggested too.
Does Spreaker have a human being at the other end of the line that you could talk to?
No, it sounds like, and I've got to dig into it a little more, but it sounds like it's just podcasts that have been made and then you upload them to that site. Kind of like, well, even iHeartRadio, you know, they carry our archives, but right now they refer back to BlogTalk's archives to pick it up. But if
and we've been with BlogTalk.
Go ahead.
Now, we've been with BlogTalk for 15 years, and we've never had a conversation with anybody there.
Yeah, 14. Yeah,
there's just no access. You get, when we're doing a show, you can send them a note into their support system, and maybe in a day or two or 3 or 5, they'll get back to you. It's been one of the deficiencies of that. But I'm sure that we'll work the details out. It's not the first challenge we've had in the 50 years of developing and making this work available. So and it's one that it'll get done when it gets done.
If you chatted or emailed the Spreaker people and told them that you've been giving your services for self-help and the healing of the planet for free, would they consider, even if they charge other people who are just regular listeners, would they consider a special arrangement with you? It would be worth asking.
We'll ask the question. Excellent question, yes. That they might choose to do it as a service. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Because there are companies that do that, I know, that sort of thing. So, yeah, great idea.
Good.
We'll put that into the conversation.
Good. I'm going to ask my daughter because she's a podcaster.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
We will take all. Yeah, I didn't know if I was unmuted. We will take all considerations.
I know.
All input, yes.
Yeah. But, Jeanie, the end of January, okay, you've got to have them all safe. But you don't have to have them all accessible at the end of January.
That's
you can
correct.
take some time.
Right. They're all safe now.
Yeah, good.
It isn't that we're at risk of losing them. We've got them backed up. It's just creating the mechanism for accessibility is the challenge.
Yeah. Right. Well, I can really relate. All of my finale created music is now defunct. I'm keeping an old system on my computer so I can still use Finale software, but it's no longer updating, and it won't be useful if I upgrade my system software. So I have converted all my pieces to the new software, but it is so intense a learning curve, and I'm composing so little that I'm not sure I want to do it, especially since I'm on another project. But I can certainly relate to the initial panic, you wouldn't believe how many composers who are younger, their life's work, like mine, are on there, and they're in a total panic. So they need to do wake-up sheets. Yeah, same idea. Things move so fast. So anyway.
Technology.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, anything exciting happening in your world? Your surgery went just fine?
Yeah, that, you know, as my son says, physical things, meh, nothing to it. He says it's the mental stuff that really gets to him, and I feel the same. That was a great session yesterday. That part of your wake-up sheet says, I'm willing to go through all the stages of the healing.
Physical, mental, emotional symptoms.
No way. But this is important to have people listen to. It isn't as bad as you fear. As soon as I put down the goals and started looking at what my interior, you said it, thought disorders. I was writing down my thought disorders, and there's a ton of them, but they all tend to dissolve at once. As soon as you just get the pig by the tail, you've got the whole pig.
Well, it's, you know, it was yesterday or the day before we covered one of the sayings in the book of Thomas, and it was Yeshua saying, you know, I'm going to destroy this house, and nobody's going to rebuild it. And, you know, I think that's exactly what he was talking about, you know, the stuff that we so dearly relied on and that we thought kept us safe, and, you know, it was life itself. When should I go out and get on the other side of it? It's like, puke, who would want to rebuild with that stuff? You know, it's like abhorrent. But when the mind thought it was a protector, it was a cherished possession. And yet, when awakening in being, what the world in history has cherished is just so much insanity.
Oh, let's not get into it. It's just beyond.
Oh, we're going to.
Okay.
We're going to. That's the idea. Because what I'm not willing to look at and deal with is going to maintain its existence, and is going to, at the least tuned moment, it's going to stick up its ugly head, and here we go again. So the sooner we look, the faster we get through the abhorrent, rather than cherishing and valuing it. It's like, ooh, happy to be rid of this.
Yeah, and also that anything that is good and true that's mixed in with it will not be taken away. And you don't even know what that is.
True. Yes. Yeah, there's the gift side of it all.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the mental gym. When you go in and you do that mental, emotional, spiritual work, then you build mental, emotional, spiritual muscle. So that's what we're here to do, is be the gym.
Okay. Carry on.
All right. Any other thoughts for you today?
No, I'll be listening. Thank you, Michael. Jeanie.
Okay.
Greetings.
Blessings.
We're all punching
we're
around.
on
it. Good.
We're on it. All right. Take care.
Good.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
So our calling number, if you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, is 563-999-3581. If you call that number, you're listening to the show directly. And then if you push 1, that'll raise a hand. And we thank BlogTalk for all the years we've had this service available. It's really served us well. And, you know, when we think of an hour to 2 hours a day for 15 years, 5 days a week, they've been really an awesome service. And so appreciation to them. I have no idea why they're going away. I wish they weren't, but that's what it is for today. But if you're in listener land and you call that number, you'll be linked right into the show directly on your phone. And then if you push 1, through the magic of technology, that will raise a hand, and Jeanie will know you want to speak to us. So any thoughts for anyone? I know Celinda was texting me, and I'd suggested that we do the conversation on the show. So, Celinda, if you're out there.
She is not on the switchboard right now. Oh, yep, there she is.
Oh.
She just put up her hand. So, 541, you're on the air.
Welcome, young lady.
Hello, Michael. Hello, Jeanie.
Hey. How do you be?
I'm good. The last 3 days of shows have just totally been spot on for an issue I've been facing, and so I'm going to take care of it this evening in the support group. And I just wanted to share with you about bonding this morning because that's part of the issue too.
Right.
Yeah, and what I found was your comment was really interesting to me, so I ran off to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary of 1978, which I find much more apt than a lot of the present-day dictionaries in relation to going back to the origins of words. And I looked up bond, and there were like multiple definitions of bonding, and every one of them except one had to do with money and obligation.
Right.
And the one, right, exactly, all of that stuff.
Bonds
or
being owned.
A binding agreement, which, you know,
Yeah.
is obligatory. And when I went back to the first definition of the noun bond, and the derivation of it, this is what it said mostly, obsolete. And what it meant was a householder. It was an old English term, I believe. Householder.
Right.
And it said, and I can't read it because it's real small print, but let me find it here because it's really interesting. And apparently that's what I picked up the word as meaning, bond. There we go. The original word, it was actually Middle English from Old English bonda, householder, from Old Nordic, I guess, O-N, bondi, alternative of buondi, from the preposition of bua, to dwell, kin to Old English gur, dwelling, and more apt, bower. And I thought, actually the only obsolete one is the bondman, whatever that meant. But everything else in the second definition of the noun had to do with some kind of indebtedness or coming together, like a loyalty or something where you better be loyal, like I'm loyal to the IRA. And then all the things that means, that you can't take your loyalty back or you're a traitor. And there was one definition in the second one, which it was to mean to join. Let me see if I can find it. And apparently that was the only one that I really picked up on.
Right.
If I can find
well, my
it.
offering, you know, what I was attempting to say by text, and it's easier to say with words, is in the way
Right.
we use the word bond today, where people are bonding with each other. And we can bond through any experience. People oftentimes bond through trauma. People bond
Right.
through beauty. People bond through
Right.
a sport. And my take, looking at it from the energetic point of view, getting out of, you know, the mind and its past structures and recognizing everything as energy. If you and I have a common experience, you've been imbued with the frequency or the energy of that experience, and so have I. And so when we come into each other's field, we literally resonate. We built a resonance.
Yeah.
And the deeper we are in experience, in common experience, the more bonded we are. And that would apply, let's say, for instance, to a culture. You know, one of the things that has struck me, or what I've been kind of working on for today's show, is that what people, the mental, emotional cultural structures that we've come out of, in many cases, are so tragic and anti-human
Right.
that those energetic patterns run minds that even say they're against what it is that they're bonded over. But when the energy
Right.
gets moving, it takes over. And so we're building a body of work that hopefully people are bonding with, energetically connecting with, and creating a higher alternative energy coming from or working toward a state of being, forgiving anything that's less than that, so that rather than the cultural dynamic of the past where, you know, women were dirt property and, you know, children, well, if you abuse them mentally, emotionally, physically, you know, England had a thing called the rule of thumb. Are you familiar with the rule of thumb?
Yes. Yes, I am.
We've all heard that one. Yeah. So the rule of thumb was a man was allowed to beat his wife, but he couldn't use a stick bigger than his thumb. That was the rule of thumb. That's the culture we come out of. You know, there was a thing in England, well, actually in Europe and England, because the origins of the word come from the French, and it was called prima nocte. And there's some question as to whether or not it's a myth or it's actual, but the fact that it shows up in more than one language, I think, and it's been denied, says that it's certainly much more than a myth. But basically, women and peons, people who didn't have the money and the power, were so devalued that, you know, the overlord of the manor, the night this young man and his betrothed were getting married, the lord of the manor had the right to take her virginity, to sleep with her the first night. Her husband didn't have. And when you recognize that that's the cultural history that we come out of, this human, like truly human dynamic of functioning from a space of love where we, as Yeshua put it, you know, as we really, who is our neighbor? Who do we care for? Who do we support? And the traditions of the past, to a great degree, have been tragic in that regard. And sadly, right now, there's a lot of that kind of tragedy, minds bonded over that tragedy, that are, you know, out there in the political world trying to bring it back. You know, so it's an interesting dynamic. And when we realize what it is that we need to historically face in ourselves, in our own genes, and remove, and the higher energy of being that we need to integrate and then bond over, creating a field. You know, I think this is what Yeshua was talking about when he said, you know, a little leavening leavens a whole loaf. That energetically, when enough people connect in with functioning from a state of being, then it shatters the insanity that has been played out of the mind that's steeped in ignorance, hate, fear, control, weakness.
And somehow I picked up bonding from that respect, probably from the therapeutic model or perception of the difference between attachment and bonding, for example. And so it's really good to flesh this out, to realize that we always have a choice. Once we're aware, we always have a choice of how we want to see something. And so that's very helpful, because I was thinking in relation of when you bond bricks together, right, where you lap them and overlay them and cement them so that they fuse and they become one. And
right.
I just went straight, or the baby duck that fuses with its other ducks. It's a sense, a visceral sense that we belong. And I think about a kitten that bonds to a human being or something. They know they're safe. It has to do with safety and inclusion and bondedness.
Yes.
And then I found when I continued down to the verb, I found a synonym, cohere. And all of a sudden, I jumped to coherence. David Bones, isn't that his name? His definition of
Yep.
sustained incoherence. Well, I
Exactly.
cohere, and the family of love, and we are all one, and and I just didn't realize that's what I've always felt about bonding. All of this, for me, bond was not the same as bound.
Right.
And then I
right.
read the definition, and I said, oh my God, I live in a culture that is steeped in bondsmen and bondswomen and all of this history of monetary commercial exchange. Yeah, and I thought, oh my goodness, I think I have just been, what's the word, when you get transported to another dimension, another age or whatever. There were a lot of movies in the 80s about that. People just going through a portal and suddenly being 300 years earlier or something like that. I can't remember what they called it, time travel or something. And
Right.
I thought,
Sure.
ooh, no wonder I've kind of felt like an outcast or an alien or something, because I don't know where it came from, but I just have a totally, I'd say I'm ultra-rural, really, hunter-gatherer or something, I'm not sure. But, yeah, and that's maybe why I enjoy this valley so much, or when I was in Hawaii. Those were the only two places, other than my memories of my childhood, that communities where I've really bonded. So, and not been bound, bond.
Yes.
But anyway, thank you for letting me carry on.
All right, holding the space.
Always, right? All right.
That's the plan.
All is well, and all
right.
is well, and all is exceedingly well. Bye now.
Okay, have a blessed one. Bye-bye.
So there are no other hands up, so I would say continue on with the gospel.
All right. So good news, yes. So I'm going to go back a little more, partly because of this conversation, and partly because of some other research I've been doing, to number 6-9 of the sayings from the book of Thomas. And it sounds strange unless you've got the brain cells to hear what's being said. First of all, remember that from the Aramaic, the words in the Beatitudes that were translated as blessed are they is the word tuvehun, and it talks about how you access unconscious structures for higher living in your mind. And so in this particular saying, he says, blessed are they who have been persecuted in their heart. And today, most people would go, well, who would want to be persecuted? But remember that Yeshua is delivering a new ethic to a vicious, brutal, violent world. And persecuted, of course, had to do with somebody coming generally from the outside, and chances are if you were persecuted in that culture, you were dead, or certainly outcast to the point where life was pretty tough. So he's saying here, you want to be persecuted in your heart. It's like, why would I want to be? What he's saying, and persecuted in this context, is to be able to look at and deal with those things which are unjust in you. So rather than the external justice system having to come in and beat on you to make you just, he's saying, oh man, you are so far ahead if you are doing your work out of choice because your own heart, your own unconscious says to you, there's something in here that doesn't belong. So if I find myself going off on a tirade and I'm doing my work rather than, being pushed into doing my work by pain, Remember, pain has a wonderful purpose. It makes people's ears grow. If I'm doing it because I've chosen to do it, because I noticed, whoa, I choose to live. I want to live a human life. I want to actually live as the active presence of love, as we human beings were designed to live. And there hasn't been much of that in history. And so what Yeshua is saying is, you are a giant step ahead because something doesn't have to come in and pound on you from the outside, because from within you, you go, oh, there's something going on in me that takes me out of my human life. And I don't need to be pushed to the wall to deal with that. I do it because I choose to persecute myself, not in the cultural sense of beating up on, but to bring myself to justice within my own unconscious, within my own heart. And what he says is, if that's what's happened to you, then you've known, you've made contact within with the source of truth, with the Father of truth. You remember at one point, he's speaking to people who are living in this hate and this fear and this rage and this control and this cultural dynamic of insanity, covering up each other's crimes, committing crimes, abuse, doing anything they chose to do to the weak because they had the money and the power to do it. And there were two justice systems. There was one justice system for those who were at the bottom, who they could milk, and then there was one for those who had the money, who they could milk for money and not ever be held accountable. But he's saying, if you've chosen to do your work and you are persecuted in your heart, then you've made contact with the source of truth within you. Where with those who were playing the game from the other side, he said, your father is a father of liars. There's no truth in him. Here he's saying, the source of truth, the Father of truth within you is yours. And then he follows up with, blessed are they that hunger. So this neural structure becomes active. If you hunger for this, for you will fill the belly. You'll be given the result, the reward, because you desired it. So most people do their work out of pain, and few do it because of choice and the desire to heal. Oh yes, everybody wants to heal, but few want to look at what they need to look at in order to come out the other side of the healing process. That's why very prominently in the worksheet is, I'm willing to go through the physical, mental, emotional symptoms of healing. We want people to be aware of this is not going to be particularly Dr. Feelgood. But if you understand how to honor truth, and you can only do that because you healed your own blockage of truth, you know, that Beatitude, when we covered the Beatitudes back last year, remember we talked about, you know, that one of the Beatitudes in Aramaic is those who are hungry and thirst for just and fair behavior between people, rather than those who hunger and thirst for, I win, you lose, no matter who's right. So if you've chosen to heal your own blockage of truth, then you won't need to find a persecutor out there. You'll observe within yourself, and you'll do that work which is within you to do, because it won't be found outside yourself. If you don't discover, if you don't live from that place of being, then the generational dramas and traumas are going to bring your life to an end rather quickly, to the alternative. And so, you know, he says you'll have your belly filled. He's saying if you do your work, then you'll reap the serenity of a true human life. And as you do that, you'll be making a monumental contribution to humanity. And you look at the context of that and the way people were treated. People who didn't have the money and the power were just, the value of human life was virtually nil. We're peeking our head up out of that darkness and and coming to the point where we truly value human life because it is human life. Honoring your neighbor, not loving your neighbor. It's not about loving your neighbor. It's about bringing the truth of who you are as love into your own mind and holding to that presence of love, which will produce a certain ethic in you. Your belly will be filled with the reward of living that ethic, is what he's saying. You know, it's not very long ago, as I say, I'm not sure. I actually looked, but I couldn't come up with an end date. But in England, especially in Scotland, and I think to a degree in Ireland, this rite of prima nocte was just, I mean, talk about insanity, slavery, trafficking in human flesh. You know, that's run most of history. And so when you realize that that's what's happened, and even the perpetrator of that lives in such pain, there is no moment for the perpetrator, and certainly none for unless one is really being persecuted in their own heart, doing their work, there certainly is no living in the delight and the literal physiological pleasure of having your physiology run by human life. I suspect that Carl Jung, you know, as a time when he lived, when, you know, we've come a long way since then, but I suspect that he had this thought in mind, and I've shared this quote from him, you know, a few times on the show, but to me it was very appropriate in this context of recognizing where we've been as humanity, where there's been so little humanity that no one gets honored and no one gets to live a true human life. And I suspect that this is very likely what Carl Jung had in mind when he wrote, the healer or teacher is not just working for a particular patient, but for him or herself, as well as his, her, or her own soul. And in so doing is perhaps laying an infinitesimal grain in the scales of humanity's soul. In other words, when you look at the darkness that humanity has crawled up out of, what was considered the norm 20, 50, 70, 100, 200, 300 years ago, what we've crawled up out of. And he's saying each individual's choice to move to a higher level, to do this, to be persecuted in their own heart, to choose to undo, to have the tool to choose to undo or forgive the hostility and fear-based mind. He's saying each one who does that is laying this infinitesimal grain in the scales of humanity's soul that we're climbing up out of the slime. He says, small and invisible as this contribution may be, it is yet an opus magnum. Each person who chooses to do their work energetically, each who chooses to give up rage and guilt and grief and fear and blame and screaming and raging and depression and hatred and vengeance, and chooses to repent. And repent means to turn another way, to let go of the focus on that past, do the work to remove it from your heart, make contact with truth, and turn toward and bring in something different. That's what I hear him saying as the infinitesimal grain in the scales of humanity's soul. And truly each person that does their work, it is an opus magnum. And while I was looking for that quote today to bring it into this conversation, I happened to come across a quote that sort of ties into the same idea that came from Horace Mann. And what Horace Mann said is, be ashamed to die unless you've won some small battle for humanity. What a giant thought. be ashamed to die unless you've won some small battle for humanity. And each person who lays that grain into humanity's soul, each person that faces another fear, another rage, another hatred, another vengeance, another guilt, another grief that maybe goes back 20 generations. Who knows where those energetic patterns come from? But each person who does that work upgrades the whole of humanity's existence. Comes the leavening that leavens the whole loaf. And to me, that's just a monumental thought. And if one does the work for no other reason but to make that contribution. Wow. What a thing to do. And then 71, so I backtracked a little bit. I know I had talked about these others earlier, but 71, but he says, I will destroy this house. And he's not talking here about a literal building. He's talking about a construct of the mind. And he's not talking about he's going to personally take out a hammer and smash down this house. He's saying, I've given you the teaching. Remember the phrase or the statement where he says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. This historical carbon-based memory image of ourselves has to be removed, has to be faced and dealt with. So he says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. And here he's acknowledging that his teaching is what will destroy ego, this state of non-being. And to recognize that it's safe to be free of this non-being self, to live literally. And it means that there's, in the context of this bonding, that there's going to be a break of the bonding with many of the traditions of our culture. So the house is the ego, and the real teaching of Yeshua will destroy it. And as I said earlier, if you dissolve the falsity that divides, the whole structure of the false self that people cling to as though it's life itself, all of a sudden becomes abhorrent once you work through it. So he's saying, and nobody would want to rebuild it once you've let go of what you've protected yourself with. It would become abhorrent to you to even think of going back there. Then on to 72. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. Let me check Jeanie and see before I move into 72. I know we backtracked a little bit, but I felt it was worth reviewing some of those things and putting a deeper context into them. I'm really enjoying the time I've been spending with these things and seeing how they link and back and forth between them. So I've, done some research on any given topic, tied it in with the forgiveness process and such, and then realized that, that's an echo of the one we read 2 weeks ago. Go back to that one. Oh, so that's where some of the review's coming from. So before we go into 72, Miss Jeanie, seeing as how we're down to about 8 minutes or so, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up? Anything happening in the chat room? Any questions from the app? Any email questions?
There are no hands up, and I'm answering Solly. He came in late about the program ceasing in January, but there are no other hands up.
Okay. Well, then I'll just continue. So staying 72 is coming out of the mouth of someone who is a member of the One World Universal Religion of Blame, and he wants Yeshua to be on his blame team, it would appear, with this saying 72. So the saying, a man said to him, speak to my brethren, in other words, the ones I'm blaming for my poverty, please, you talk to them that they may divide my father's possessions with me. In other words, I need somebody who will help me to blame somebody else and someone to straighten them out. And, he's talking about possession, so he's talking about the material world. And Yeshua's reply is, who made me the divider? And I'm not sure why he turned to his disciples at this point and said, I am not a divider, am I? Maybe he's just looking for confirmation. Your experience is that we have come to greater states of unity through this teaching. So he's looking, it appears, for some confirmation or affirmation from those he's working with. So in essence, with this statement, he's saying to this guy who's into his blame game, you want me to become involved in the petty things of this world, where I've come to speak to you about actual meaningful things? It's like, well, why are you inviting me there? And you remember he said in another passage, I am in this world, but not of it. So he's saying, my task is that of healing, not dividing. He finds this idea of dividing something repulsive, because his function is to restore wholeness to each person. And of course, the way you restore wholeness is to remove or forgive that in you with which you fragmented yourself. Now, of course, those who are fragmented, if they haven't given up their membership card and the one world universal religion of blame, have always got somebody else to blame for their being divided or fragmented. So he's saying to restore wholeness. And of course, in this passage, it's all about the stuff, eh? So what do most people, when they're divided from others, what are they divided over? Stuff, things, the goal of possession. And in essence, he's saying, he's on the opposite end of the spectrum. He says, I'm here to teach you to forgive, and forgive primarily that which divides you from yourself. Yourself being the creator. He's bringing a new message to humanity. And sadly, in a world where many people pretend to be speaking in his name, they're still telling people that they're worse than the dirt of the earth. Yeshua is looking to support people in removing those types of realities and reunifying people with their true essential nature. The first words in the worksheet are a statement of who I am, always acknowledging. And what have we bought into that separates us from that has us believe something false about ourselves? So those first words in the worksheet, I, and you put your name in there, who am love. So what is it in you that divides you from yourself if you've forgotten that? If there are situations where you don't experience yourself as that? The restoration of wholeness. So Linda mentioned David Bohm. David Bohm talked about living in a state of unbroken wholeness, still coming from brain cells where one recognizes the brokenness of the world. And he's saying, language-wise, in a bit of an awkward sense, to come to unbroken wholeness, to come back to who you are as a true human being. So how about we just take a minute and allow yourself to close your eyes, unless you're driving or operating machinery or something. But if you're in a safe place to do that, how about just getting relaxed, soften, allow yourself to take a few deep breaths. And breathe. And as you do that, imagine what it would be like to literally, out of choice, not having to have somebody come and pound on you to make you aware of what's inside of you that is painful, but rather imagine that you breathe into that state of true wholeness, and anything in you that is broken, that has removed you from that wholeness, that as you breathe, you're able to deeply drop into spaces within yourself, bringing the active presence of love through the breath into the tissue structure to create the dissolution, the removal of that which you hold that could even have you imagine that you are anything less than the presence of love in the world. And then to recognize as you breathe that as you go forth into the world as the presence of love, the only thing that could possibly take you out of that is that carry around within you that is broken. Now, if you come out of the world mind, when those sorts of things come up, you've always got a story about why that's true, caused by someone else. Because we were all brought up as members of this one world universal religion of blame, making it everybody else's fault. And you breathe into those spaces where your breath doesn't want to go, willing to open those spaces in yourself. Rather than holding those spaces hidden and having to have somebody else show up to resonate them or point them out to you, rather than drawing others in through those energetic patterns and then being able to blame them, you have this persecutor in yourself. That is, you choose to heal. You choose to really iron out all of the wrinkles in your mind until your mind is fully supportive and fully connected to and fueled by the presence of love. Currents created by being linked to the active presence of love flow through, detoxify, purify, and instill delight, aliveness, and pleasure in every cell of your structure. And if you ever lose contact with that delight, that literal energy of pleasure moving in you, you shift into a mind that is into self-persecution. That is, you quiz yourself. You talk to yourself about yourself. Rather than going away from a conflict, talking about somebody else, you talk to yourself about yourself and what it is in you that needs to be healed. That's what he's talking about with that persecution in the heart. That it's inside of you. You recognize, oh, I've got something here that wants to blame. I've got something here that wants to defend. I've got something here that I need. When the true being of human life, there's no need for protection or defense of any kind. And you just allow every cell to bask in that presence of love. And from that space, you create the best year yet of your eternal life. Thank you for joining us.